Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, everyone. Ozi v'zimratiyah vayehi li lishua. God is my strength and might. God has become my deliverance. We just heard this chanted in the Torah reading this morning as part of Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. It's chanted so beautifully, by the way. This is a victory song, which the Israelites sing just after crossing over safely from Egypt. This victory song is part of our liberation story, which we are commanded to retell on Passover. During the rest of the year, we often sing Ozi v'zimratiyah during times of uncertainty or sorrow. When we need to be comforted, we naturally imagine a God who can and who will save us. This verse arises in my own consciousness during times of stress or sadness, a soothing refrain that blankets me in peacefulness. Ozi v'zimratiyah, God is my strength and might. Vayehi li lishua, God has become my deliverance. We are singing our hope that we will be saved. But by whom? The very next verse, who remembers it? You're all muted, but think about it. I remember because I have a theological stumble over it every time I read it. Adonai ish milchama. God is a man of war. Adonai Shemo. Adonai is God's name. So I invite us to think this morning about the textures of the literal translation of this verse. Ish milchama, man of war. What does it mean to pray to a man of war? Are we praying to a man of war? First, it is unusual in the Torah for God to be described as an ish, as a man, and the rabbinic commentators take note. Ibn Ezra in 12th century Spain explains that ish milchama, man of war, does not mean that God is literally a warrior, but this phrase is used to describe what he calls etzem davar, the core substance of God. In other words, ish milchama is God's personality, or we could say that God's character is that of a warrior. Of course, Ibn Ezra's interpretation makes a lot of sense in context. Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, is a war anthem, a poem of victory, but also of violence. We read in the next verses, Pharaoh's chariots and his army God cast into the sea, and the pick of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deeps cover them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O God, glorious in power. Your right hand, O God, shatters the foe. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury, and it consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea. In this poem in praise of a warrior God, a God who has a core being that is warlike, we can feel the ish milchama here. We do sense that the character of God here is a man of war. Rashi in 11th century France also identifies a tone of dominance in this language of ish milchama. He teaches that when the word ish is used in this context, it is interchangeable with the Hebrew word Baal, which means master. And Rashi also adds beautiful additional layers, which can help us if we are one of those, myself included, who struggles with the image of God as warrior. Rashi teaches that God is a warrior not of weapons, but of words. Referring to the second half of the verse, it's Adonai ish milchama, Adonai shemo. Adonai shemo, Adonai is God's name. God's name is a word, a meaningful word. And Rashi says that as David said to Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you with the name of God." So too, Rashi says, does God wage war through meaningful words, not through violence. Another reading from Rashi. Af b'sha'a shehu nilcham v'nochek me'oivav. Even at the time when God battles against and avenges our enemies, God's enemies. Ochezhu b'midato lerachem et bruav. God grasps hold of the attribute of mercy, to have mercy on all God's creations. What a gorgeous image to counter Ish Milchama, the man of war. Here we have God grasping hold of God's own mercy, of God's own rachamim. There is a story in the Talmud that the angels wanted to recite a victory song before God, in praise of God, while the Egyptians were drowning in the sea during this moment, which we read in the Torah this morning. And they wanted to sing a song of victory, but God stopped them, saying, "My own creations, the Egyptians, are drowning in the sea, and you are reciting a song for me?" The rabbis conclude that while God allows humans to rejoice over the death of the Egyptians to a limited degree, neither God nor the angels are allowed. In this story, God does not inhabit the character of a warrior very well. This is no Ish Milchama. Returning to my original question, when we sing Ozi v'Zimrat Yah, are we praying to an Ish Milchama, to a God of war, a man of war? I'll share that I struggle with this. I was raised on 1960s folk music, Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Peter, Paul and Mary. And I believe in nonviolence as a moral commitment. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught in the context of the Vietnam War, the most basic way in which all men may be divided is between those who believe that war is unnecessary and those who believe that war is inevitable. Between those to whom the sword is the symbol of honor and those to whom seeking to convert swords into plowshares is the only way to keep our civilization from disaster. As someone who is firmly in the swords into plowshares camp, I wish I could ask Rabbi Heschel how he prayed each morning to an ish milchama. After all, the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam, is part of our daily morning liturgy. How do we pray to an ish milchama? I stumble over it every time, sometimes trying to imagine this warrior God, but ultimately hoping for the God that the rabbis describe in the Talmud, who quiets the victory songs of the angels, or the God that Rashi depicts, the God who grasps hold of God's own mercy. May all of our liberation stories, even and especially the story that we retell each year on Passover, always center the attribute of mercy and compassion. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.